Today's Lions Talk Live, we're going to do a deep dive into one of the age-old questions, it seems, that has confronted every Detroit Lions fan. Why do the Lions seem to get bad calls going their way at nearly 3 times the NFL average when it comes to margin for error/correction calls on any other team in the league? We think we've uncovered the truth, and we're going to dive into that and maybe just a little bit more in today's deep dive edition of Lions Talk Live. Well, greetings and salutations to everybody out there in YouTube land. I'm your host once again, Dan Thornton, and I wanted to thank each and every one for tuning in this Monday to Lions Talk Live. If you have not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. It takes you maybe a second and a half to hit the subscription button, maybe leave a thumbs up, and if you'd like, an interactive comment in the section below. But anyways, on to the topic. Here it is. If you've been a Lions fan as long as me, since the late 70s and 80s, I'm going to ask you guys a very poignant question. Do you really remember a ton of abnormal calls, odd calls, whatever you want to call them, incorrect calls that have confronted the Lions during the 70s, 80s, or 90s? If you're like me, you maybe remember one or two, but nothing as odd as what we've seen in recent years. In fact, you could blame it on a number of things. You maybe could just say, hey, the refs are not as good as they once were. Whatever it is, like we mentioned in the intro, the Lions seem to have 3 times as many questionable calls, oddity calls, whatever you want to call them, calls, than any other team in the league. And we started looking into this about a month ago to try to find out why. Since the early 2000s, it just seems very, very odd that Lions seem to every year have 1 or 2 or 3 just constantly pop up. And we think we've uncovered some compelling evidence. Like we said before, if you're a Lions fan for a significant amount of time, the 80s really went, for the most part, without any real questionable calls. Same with the 90s, perhaps the golden era of Detroit Lions football since the 1950s. But then the early 2000s came, and it just seemed like questionable call after questionable call became the norm for any Lions fan to have to endure, let alone the team. So as we looked into why this potentially has happened, we uncovered a couple of things. We're going to start off with an incident that happened in early 2007 when a then young, completing the first year of his term, Roger Goodell had just taken over as commissioner, ending the first year of his reign as NFL commissioner, and then this happened. Goodell, as I'm sure you all know, took over as NFL commissioner in 2006, and during his first year and a half, things were on the upswing. The NFL was looking into expansion even, which they did do. But over time, what did happen in 2008? A downturn that very few people saw the extent to throughout our country and other countries with the Great Recession. As 2008 unfolded, it led the NFL into looking into ways to boost up sales revenue for teams that were starting to struggle a wee bit because of the Great Recession. And that's going to take us into the first obvious thing as we dove in more and more looking for reasons why the NFL may have a beef with the Lions, and this is what we came up with. In May of 2009, the owners' meeting took place out in California, and it became something of a point of contention where the Lions were asked to give up the Thanksgiving Day game. It did not go unnoticed at the time that the once unanimous Lions get to keep the Thanksgiving Day game was no longer unanimous. Goodell, looking to expand his power and his structure within his position, asked NFL owners to take that game away from the Detroit Lions and make it a rotating game for various different teams throughout the whole league. I want to correct that and say that it was March 22, 2009. So, with that being said, Goodell, who's trying to exert power over this league and establish a base of power which he could maintain his position for some time to come, ran into stiff resistance from a number of the old guard owners throughout the NFL. And yes, obviously the Lions are among that. The NFL did not get enough votes in that particular date to oversee and take control of the Lions game. Let's be fair, since the late 90s/2000, the Lions had not been great. And this is something that was reflected in ratings at the time, along with advertising sales. And that takes us into another point of contention. During the Great Recession, the Lions, Fords pulled back on a number of their normal advertising moves throughout NFL games, etc. A lot of the endorsements they did at the NFL were cut and slashed, like most companies. But the merger of the two, not willing to give up the Thanksgiving Day game, along with a noticeable decline in revenue investment into advertising through the NFL, perhaps led us to where we are now in the current status of the NFL and their beef with the Detroit Lions. Now that we've established what we believe are the basis of the beef the NFL has had with the Fords and the Detroit Lions, let's go into the first obvious evidence of perhaps questionable calls that have taken place since September 12th, 2010, until even this year with the Detroit Lions. That's right. If you know that date, it's a date that lives in NFL infamy. That's correct. In Soldier Field, Calvin Johnson appears to score the game-winning touchdown against the Chicago Bears, catches it, goes to the end zone, lifts his arms, and purposefully drops the ball. But yet, seconds later, a call comes in asking officials to review it. That's right, the officials did rule it was a touchdown. It was a call from outside the arena that led officials to have to review the play and ultimately come up with what's known as the process of the catch. That's correct. Detroit Lions did not end up winning that game. Calvin Johnson's touchdown was wiped away, and it started a 13-year cycle of questionable calls that we're still enduring today, including this year's game that could have put the Lions into the playoffs when we saw the Rams get called for 4 or 5 phantom penalties, which took the win potentially away from them and gave it to Seattle, striking down the Detroit Lions. From there, it just seemed to become a rite of passage. Every year, the Lions would get odd call after odd call. Whether you remember Golden Tate being ruled down after being called for a touchdown, whether you remember Stephen Tulick being called for a phantom face mask, or how about this, replacement refs on a personal foul call don't give 15 yards, give 27 yards, and it stands. Even though players from both teams pointed it out, the ref said, nah, we're going to go with this. Now go on to this year with the Rams game. Or how about Ndamukong Suh getting called for a personal foul for tackling a guy by his dreads. Yes, you can pull somebody's hair in the NFL. You cannot horse collar him. Whatever it is, you just saw odd play after odd play. I'll even throw at you the Titus Young in Green Bay Matt Flynn game where he clearly scores a touchdown. Officials on the field rule it an incomplete pass, even though replays show both feet down. He completes the process of the catch, but for whatever reason, the Lions are robbed from that touchdown, have to settle for a field goal, and yes, they don't win that game. But whatever metrics you look at, there definitely seems to be one thing that's tied to the recent, and by recent I mean the last 13, 15 years, downtrend in officiating for the Detroit Lions. And it's quite simply this, the thing that makes the world go round: money. The Lions upset the hierarchy of the NFL, took money away through advertising, which, by the way, over time they have returned to spending nearly as much as they did prior to 2008. But the one thing that cannot be shaved away nor shooed away is the fact that the Lions, even since 2009, have declined the ability for the NFL to take that game away. Let's all remember, the Lions were the team that brought the Thanksgiving Day tradition to the NFL. But Goodell, like I said, early in his career, looking to establish himself and give himself a base of power, something for other owners to believe in, was denied this opportunity, and it is, in my opinion, it's stuck with him all these years. This is reflected in so many numerous missed calls. Beyond missed calls, you now have the Lions this year stepping up and raising a stink over what happened in the Seattle versus LA Rams game. In fact, Sheila Hemp Ford has even stepped up and made personal contact with a number of owners trying to circumvent, depending on how you view it, Roger Goodell's authority. It is my opinion, human behavior is what human behavior does. Humans get upset when you don't give them what they want, and when you're somebody in power, like Goodell, you stood up to him, you beat him at his own game in 2009, and he's made you pay along with your fan base ever since then. I cannot say for a shadow of doubt this is what has happened, But I can say, if you spend enough time watching the books, looking at the NFL's profit margins, where they might have been hurting back then, what they wanted to do with that game, it does seem like compelling evidence. I'm sure everybody here can agree, if the NFL would have received control of the Lions Thanksgiving Day game and then been able to rotate it around to other teams over the years, that would have been a heck of a financial windfall for them. You take the game away from a struggling franchise and now award it to prominent franchises throughout the course of the last decade or so, that's a lot of money left on the table. All right, I won't go on too much longer with this. I think everybody gets the point of the video. Can I say for certain that it is what happened? No, I can't. But I do believe this. Being 50 years old, I've learned this in life. You follow the money, and that's going to teach you a lot of truths about the people involved. The NFL is definitely a company built around making money. And during a time of the Great Recession where money was flying out the windows faster than they could make it, it makes a whole lot of sense to me why all of a sudden the Lions started getting bad call after bad call, bad treatment as far as, games and everything else. To me, it just makes too much sense. But let me know what your thoughts. Leave in the comment section below. Do you agree with me? Do you have other information to throw out there? Whatever it is, I hope you all have a good day. I want to thank you all for tuning into Lions Talk Live. And again, if you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so. Go ahead and leave a thumbs up if you got a moment, and we'll talk to you all tomorrow on Lions Talk Live.